You know that specific sound a bespoke Italian leather briefcase makes when it hits a mahogany conference table? That heavy, muffled thud that screams, I cost more than your rent, and I contain the fate of your quarterly bonus? I lived for that sound. For 10 years, I was the ghost in the machine at Archer& Co. I was the senior strategy analyst who turned red ink into black, the woman who whispered in the CEO's ear when the board was out for blood, the fixer who knew where all the corporate bodies were buried because I was usually the one holding the shovel. I wasn't just an employee, I was the structural integrity of the entire firm. Richard, our CEO, a man whose tan was 3 shades too orange and whose ego was 3 sizes too big, called me his North Star. He'd look me in the eye over a scotch at the Harvard Club and say, Allison, when I move up to chairman, that chief strategy officer chair has your name etched into the lumbar support. I believed him. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was assuming that competence still mattered in a world run by bloodlines and veneers. By the way, if you're into watching corporate empires crumble in real time, or just want to see a woman methodically dismantle a nepotism baby's life, go ahead and hit subscribe and maybe give this a like. It helps the algorithm find the other vengeful souls out there. Okay, back to the carnage. The beginning of the end didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a 24-year-old girl named Madison. Madison was Richard's niece. She had an MBA from a university that sounded like a salad dressing brand and the kind of vocal fry that could strip paint off a hatchback. Richard brought her in as a special projects consultant, which is corporate code for we need to give her a salary so she stops trying to become a DJ in Berlin. Allison, Richard had said, leaning over my desk with that used car salesman grin, take Maddie under your wing. Show her the ropes. It's good leadership practice for when you take the big chair next quarter. So I did. I showed her the ropes. I showed her the financial modeling software. I showed her how to read a P&L statement without passing out from boredom. I spent 6 months essentially running a daycare center for a girl who thought synergy meant everyone getting along and who asked me if we could expense her therapy dog's organic kibble. I fixed her slide decks at 3 a.m. I rewrote her emails so she didn't sound like a semi-literate influencer. I was polishing the very knife that was about to find a home between my shoulder blades. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday. Tuesdays are the days hope goes to die in a PowerPoint presentation. It was the Q3 all-hands meeting. The entire company was packed into the main auditorium, fidgeting with their phones, waiting for the usual rah-rah speech about how we're disrupting the paradigm or whatever buzzword salad Richard had tossed together. I was sitting in the front row, wearing my future CSO blazer, Armani, tailored, sharp enough to cut glass. Richard was on stage, pacing back and forth. I can hand. He looked sweaty. He looked like a man trying to sell a monorail to a town that had already been scammed by a monorail. We need fresh vision, Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the acoustic tiles. We need agility. We need the kind of forward-thinking leadership that understands the digital native landscape. My stomach dropped. Digital native landscape? The only thing Richard knew about digital natives was that they didn't like his Facebook posts. That is why, Richard continued, gesturing grandly to the wings of the stage, I am thrilled to announce our new Chief Strategy Officer. Please welcome, Madison Archer. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was a physical vacuum. It sucked the air out of my lungs. I watched as Madison bounced onto the stage, wearing a pink pantsuit that looked like it was made out of bubblegum wrappers, waving to a room full of people who had been working there longer than she had been alive. She grabbed the mic. Hi guys, she squealed. Oh my god, I am so pumped to pivot this company into the future. We are going to disrupt everything. I didn't blink. I couldn't. It felt like my blood had been replaced with liquid nitrogen. I looked at Richard. He caught my eye for a split second, then immediately looked away, feigning interest in Madison's shoes. He knew. The coward knew exactly what he had done. He had taken my decade of loyalty, my 80-hour weeks. I saved deals, and he had handed them to a girl whose hardest decision in life so far had been which filter to use on her brunch photo. The applause was scattered, polite, terrified. The CFO, a man named Marcus who had the personality of a spreadsheets tab but knew quality when he saw it, looked at me. His face was a mask of horror. He knew who actually did the work. He knew who kept the lights on. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't storm the stage and strangle Richard with his own Hermes tie, although the thought was a vivid, beautiful hallucination. Instead, a cold, metallic calm settled over me. It was the kind of calm you see in the eye of a hurricane, right before the roof gets ripped off. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked out of the auditorium while Madison was midway through a sentence about holistic brand vibes. I walked straight to my office. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take the framed photo of my dog. I didn't take my award for Employee of the Decade. I sat down at my computer and typed 2 sentences. To Richard Archer, CEO from Allison DeWitt subject, resignation congrats to Madison. I resign effective immediately. I hit send. Then I printed it, signed it with a pen that cost more than Madison's car, and walked it over to HR. the HR director. A woman named Linda who lived in fear of her own shadow, looked at the paper, then at me. Allison, she whispered, her eyes wide. Is this? Are you sure? Richard will flip. We have the board meeting next week. Who's going to prep the deck? Madison is the CSO, I said, my voice smooth, devoid of any jagged edges. I'm sure she has a vision for the deck. Something about pivoting, I believe, but she doesn't know how to access the server, Linda stammered. Sounds like a strategic challenge, I said. Good luck, Linda. I walked out of the building. The New York air smelled like garbage and exhaust, but to me it smelled like sweet, intoxicating liberation. I hailed a cab. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. Richard, once, twice, 10 times, I turned the phone off. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was just a scorned woman who would go home, drink a bottle of wine, cry to her therapist, and eventually come crawling back for a consulting gig. They thought the story ended here. But I wasn't just a strategist, Richard. I was the architect. And you don't fire the architect after you've moved into the house, especially not when the architect is the only one who knows the foundation is built on a sinkhole. I didn't just leave. I left a void. And I knew, with the mathematical certainty of a well-balanced equation, that nature abhors a vacuum. Madison wasn't ready for the job, but she was certainly ready for the fall. And I intended to be there, not to catch her, but to make sure she hit every single branch on the way down. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an alarm. I woke up to the silence of a calendar that had suddenly been wiped clean of 7 o'clock a.m. alignment calls and 8 o'clock p.m. crisis mitigation Zoom meetings. It was disorienting, like stepping off a treadmill that had been running at sprint speed for 10 years. But then the rage kicked in, not the hot, messy kind that makes you key a car, but the cold, crystalline kind that makes you topple a regime. I had to go back one last time. HR protocols. The exit interview farce. I dressed for a funeral, all black, severe lines, lipstick the color of a fresh arterial wound. When I walked into the lobby of Archer & Co., the receptionist, a sweet kid named Jason, looked like he was about to cry. Miss DeWitt, he whispered, it's chaos upstairs. Madison ordered a kombucha tap for the break room, but she accidentally canceled the Bloomberg terminal subscriptions to pay for it. Priorities, Jason, I said, breezing past security. The elevator ride up was the longest 30 seconds of my life. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't the hum of productivity anymore, it was the buzz of nervous energy. People were huddled in cubicles, whispering. When they saw me, the whispers stopped dead. I walked down the hallway like I owned the mortgage on the building. Madison was in my office. She hadn't even waited for me to clear my things. She was sitting in my ergonomic chair, spinning back and forth, talking loudly on speakerphone. No, I don't care about the legacy accounts, Tyler. They're so. Umer Energy, we need to pivot to crypto or NFTs. Are those still a thing? She saw me and stopped spinning. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed that I was interrupting her visioning. Oh, hey, Allison, she chirped. I was just vibing in here. The feng shui is way better than my cubicle. Hope you don't mind. Richard said it was cool. It's all yours, Madison, I said, my voice flat. I'm just here for my files. Totally, she said, waving a hand. Take whatever. Oh, and hey, no hard feelings, right? Uncle Richard said you were totally chill about it. Totally chill. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was a child playing dress up in a burning building. No hard feelings, I lied. Just a word of advice, Madison. Watch the Q4 projections. The spreadsheet has a macro that auto-updates from the legal server. If you break the link, the SEC compliance triggers a red flag. Her eyes glazed over. Macro, is that like diet thing? Something like that. I walked over to the filing cabinet. This was the moment, the setup. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside wasn't a stash of snacks or gym clothes. It was my in case of emergency leverage, but I didn't take it all. I took the personal items, my Rolodex of private contacts, the hard drive with my intellectual property. But I left one thing behind. A single, slate-gray folder placed conspicuously on the empty desk surface was labeled Internal Audit and Governance Gaps, 2020 to 2024. Inside that folder was a memo I had written 6 months ago, detailing several procedural anomalies in how Richard handled vendor contracts. It wasn't illegal yet, it was just sloppy, dangerous. The kind of thing a competent CSO would read, panic over, and fix immediately to protect the CEO. Madison wouldn't read it, or if she did, she wouldn't understand it. She'd probably use the back of the pages to sketch logo ideas, but someone else would find it eventually. And when they did, it would be proof that the issues were known, documented, and ignored. Are you going to take the plant? Madison asked, pointing to my dying fiddle leaf fig. No, I said. It needs sunlight and attention. I don't think it'll survive the new administration. I walked out of the office, leaving the folder there like a loaded gun on a coffee table. I went straight to HR. Linda was sweating. Allison, Richard wants to do the exit interview himself, she said, wringing her hands. No, I said, standard forms only. I sign the NDA regarding trade secrets, I take my accrued vacation pay, and I leave. If Richard wants to talk to me, he can speak to my attorney. You have an attorney? I'm a strategist, Linda. I always have a contingency. I signed the papers. I didn't glance at the non-compete clause because I knew it was unenforceable in New York if the resignation was under constructive dismissal pretenses, which giving my job to a niece arguably was. But I wasn't going to fight them in court for a settlement. That was too small, too petty. I wanted the kingdom. Or rather, I wanted to watch the kingdom burn so I could roast marshmallows over the embers. As I walked to the elevator, Richard burst out of his corner office. "Allison," he shouted. He looked disheveled. "Don't be dramatic. Come back inside. We can create a role for you, senior advisor to the CSO. We'll keep your salary the same." I turned and looked at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted me to be the brain while Madison wore the crown. He wanted me to do the work while she took the credit, all for the low price of my dignity. "Richard," I said, loud enough for the bullpen to hear, "I don't do advisor. And I certainly don't do babysitting. You wanted a new direction? You got it. Enjoy the view." The elevator doors closed on his red, sputtering face. I walked out of the building with nothing but my purse and a single locked file folder tucked under my arm. It felt light. But the weight of what I was carrying in my head, the codes, the clauses, the buried bodies, was heavy enough to crush them all. I wasn't unemployed. I was just freelance. My first project was the demolition of Archer and Co. To understand how I was going to gut Richard, you have to go back 3 years. It was a rainy November in 2021. We were courting Greenpoint Capital, a private equity firm with pockets deeper than the Marianas Trench and a reputation for being about as warm and fuzzy as a velociraptor. We needed their money to scale. They needed a mid-market firm with high potential. It was a match made in capitalism. The negotiations were brutal. Greenpoint sent their lead counsel, a man named Gordon Vane. Gordon was a legend. He didn't argue, he just stared at you until you questioned your own existence. Richard was terrified of him. Richard liked deals that happened on golf courses with handshakes and scotch. Gordon liked deals that happened in windowless rooms with 400-page contracts and blood oaths. I was the point person on the deal structure. Richard couldn't be bothered with the boring legal stuff, so he delegated the redlining to me and our in-house counsel, a guy named Dave who was mostly there to make sure we didn't accidentally sell the building. It was 2 a.m. on the final night of negotiations. The conference room smelled like stale pizza and high-stakes desperation. Gordon was sitting across from me, looking fresh as a daisy. I was running on caffeine and spite. "We need a safeguard," Gordon said, tapping his Montblanc pen on the table. "Greenpoint isn't in the business of funding vanity projects. If leadership fails, we need a trigger to protect our investment." Dave, our lawyer, bristled. "We can't give you a board majority. Richard won't sign it. He needs to maintain control." Gordon looked at me. He knew I was the one actually building the model. "Allison, thoughts?" I looked at the draft. I knew Richard. I knew he was getting lazy. I knew he was already talking about bringing family into the business. And I knew that if things went south, I would be the one expected to fix it with no authority. I saw an opening. "What if we add a conditional clause?" I suggested, keeping my voice steady. "Not a board majority by default, but a competency trigger. If specific KPIs, EBITDA, retention, compliance, drop below a certain threshold for 2 consecutive quarters, or if there is a material breach of governance protocols, Greenpoint gets temporary voting override to restructure the C-suite." Dave frowned. "Richard won't like restructure. Call it strategic realignment capability," I said. "He loves the word strategic. He won't read the definition." Gordon's eyes narrowed. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He saw exactly what I was doing. I was building a fire escape for the investors and a trapdoor for the CEO. "Article 7D, Gordon said, a small, terrifying smile touching his lips. "Strategic realignment due to governance failure or material mismanagement." We drafted it right there. The language was dense, buried in the middle of page 142 of the Shareholder Rights Agreement. It defined material mismanagement broadly, including hiring of unqualified executive personnel without independent board review and gross negligence regarding compliance reporting. The next morning, Richard breezed in to sign the final documents. He was hungover, wearing sunglasses indoors. "Did we get the valuation we wanted?" he asked, hovering the pen over the signature line. "Yes," I said. "We got the money. And I still have 51% voting rights. As long as the company performs, Richard." I said, "It's all standard." "Great. Boring legal mumbo-jumbo," he laughed and scrawled his signature. He didn't read a single word, he didn't even flip the page. He was too busy thinking about the press release. Gordon shook Richard's hand, but he looked at me. There was a moment of silent acknowledgement. A nod. Game recognized game. That document, the Shareholder Rights Agreement, was currently sitting in a vault at Greenpoint Capital. Richard had a copy in his office safe, probably under a stack of Golf Digest magazines. He had forgotten Article 7D existed. But I hadn't. Article 7D wasn't just a clause, it was a kill switch. And Madison, with her kombucha taps and her complete lack of regulatory knowledge, wasn't just pressing buttons in the cockpit. She was dancing on the launch codes. All I had to do was wait for the material mismanagement to become undeniable. And based on what I had seen in her first 24 hours, I wouldn't have to wait long. I had the map. I knew where the mines were buried. Now, I just had to watch them step on every single one. It took exactly 3 weeks for the wheels to come off. I wasn't surprised by the crash, I was surprised by the velocity. It was like watching a toddler try to pilot a Boeing 747, tragic, terrifying, and impossible to look away from. I was sitting in my apartment, wearing sweatpants that cost less than my old dry cleaning bill, sipping coffee and watching the stock ticker. Archer & Co. was holding steady, but the internal chatter on LinkedIn and Blind, the anonymous corporate gossip app, was a five-alarm fire. New CSO just banned Excel because it's not visually inspiring. We have to submit budgets in Canva now. Anonymous employee, is it normal for strategy meetings to start with a vibe check and end with a group chant? Asking for a friend who wants to quit. Verified Archer employee Madison was busy disrupting. Her first major initiative was something called Project Neon. From what I could gather from my former contacts, who were texting me frantically at all hours, Project Neon was a complete rebrand of our core B2B service offerings. Archer & Co. made its money providing boring, reliable logistics analytics to boring, reliable manufacturing firms. Madison decided this was stale. She wanted to pivot to lifestyle logistics. She fired the external compliance auditing firm, a company we had used for 7 years to ensure our data handling met federal privacy standards. Why? Because, I quote from a leaked email forwarded to me by a terrified junior analyst, their logo is ugly, and their lead auditor gives me bad energy. We're going with this boutique agency my friend Tyler runs. They do crypto consulting, but they're super agile. That was strike one. Firing a certified auditor for a crypto consultant friend wasn't just stupid, it was a potential breach of our data security covenants. Strike two came in the form of the vendor town hall. Usually, I handled these. I would present the quarterly roadmap, reassure our suppliers, and talk about supply chain resilience. Madison decided to turn it into a vision quest. She showed up 20 minutes late, wearing a headset microphone like she was doing a TED talk. She didn't have slides. She had a mood board. We're moving away from rigid contracts, she told a room full of steel manufacturers and shipping magnates. We want our partnership to flow like water. We want to operate on trust and blockchain vibes. The suppliers, men and women who dealt in tonnage and tariffs, stared at her blankly. Then the questions started. Does this mean you're changing the payment terms? Payment terms are so binary, Madison replied. We're looking at dynamic value exchange. Translation, we aren't going to pay you on time. Within 48 hours, 3 major vendors paused their shipments. They cited uncertainty regarding fiscal governance. I sat in my living room, downloading every report, every leaked email, every panicked text message. I wasn't just gossiping, I was building a dossier. I had a folder on my laptop titled The Fall. It contained 1. The email firing the auditor. 2. The transcript of the vendor town hall recorded by a loyalist in the AV booth. 3. A screenshot of Madison's new organizational chart, which eliminated the risk management department and replaced it with a brand evangelist team. But the cherry on top was the Q3 financial revision. Because Madison didn't understand the macro I warned her about, she had manually entered revenue projections into the master deck. She added a zero, just one little zero. Instead of projecting 4% growth, she projected 40%. She presented this to the internal leadership team. Richard, desperate for a win, didn't check the math. He signed off on it. They sent the preliminary guidance to the investors, including Greenpoint Capital. It was fraud, accidental, incompetent fraud, but fraud nonetheless. In the corporate world, stupidity is not a legal defense. I looked at the document on my screen. The 40% growth slide. It was in a font called Papyrus. Oh, Madison, I whispered to the empty room. You just handed me the gun. It was time. I didn't want to go back to Archer & Co. I didn't want my job back. I wanted justice. And justice in my world wore a bespoke suit and carried a very thick briefcase. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Gordon Vane's office, the assistant answered. This is Allison DeWitt, I said. Tell Gordon I have an update on Article 7D, and tell him to bring the good wine. The wine bar was called El Aubly, the Oblivion. Fitting. It was dark, expensive, and quiet enough to plan a murder or a hostile takeover. I was sitting in a corner booth, a glass of Sancerre untouched in front of me. On the table sat the physical copy of my dossier, bound in nondescript black leather. Gordon Vane walked in at 7:05 p.m. He hadn't aged a day since the deal 3 years ago. He still looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright and wear Tom Ford. He slid into the booth opposite me, his eyes scanning the room for eavesdroppers before locking onto mine. Allison, he said, his voice a low rumble, you look rested. Unemployment suits you. Consulting, Gordon, I corrected. I'm a free agent, of course, and I assume this meeting isn't just to catch up on old times? He gestured to the black binder. I hear you received the preliminary Q3 guidance from Archer & Co. Yesterday, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Gordon nodded, taking a sip of the water the waiter had placed. Aggressive numbers. Richard is bullish. 40% growth in a stagnating logistics market? It's a miracle, it's a typo, I said. Gordon froze. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth. Excuse me, I slid the binder across the table. Open to tab 3. He opened it. He saw the side-by-side comparison. My original model showing 4% growth, and Madison's Project Neon slide showing 40%, with the manual entry clearly highlighted. She broke the formula link, I explained. She thought the cell looked lonely, so she typed in a number that felt right. Richard signed off on it without an audit because he's too busy trying to convince the board that Madison is a prodigy. Gordon stared at the page. His jaw tightened. If this is true, they just submitted false guidance to a majority shareholder. That's securities fraud. It's material mismanagement, I said, emphasizing the phrase we both knew by heart. Turn to tab 4. Tab 4 was the email chain regarding the firing of the compliance auditor and the hiring of Tyler's crypto and consulting shack, or whatever it was called. Gordon read it. He read it again. He closed his eyes for a brief moment as if praying for patience. She fired Deloitte for a vibe mismatch, and she replaced them with an uncertified entity owned by a personal friend, I added. That triggers the vendor integrity clause in the investment agreement. It's a breach of covenant, Gordon. He closed the binder. He placed his hand on top of it, claiming it. The shark smelled blood. Why are you giving me this, Allison? He asked, studying my face. You want the CEO chair? Is that the play? We invoke 7D, decapitate Richard, and install you as the savior? I took a sip of my wine. It was crisp, cold, perfect. No, I said, I don't want the chair. I don't want to fix the mess she made. I've spent 10 years fixing Richard's messes. I'm done being the janitor. Then what do you want? I want the record corrected, I said. I want them to know that competence isn't hereditary. And I want to watch the look on Richard's face when he realizes that the boring legal mumbo-jumbo he ignored is the thing that ends him. Gordon smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just found a loophole the size of a truck. Article 7D requires an emergency board session, he said, his mind already working through the bylaws. We can call it for governance concerns. We don't have to specify the evidence until we're in the room. Tuesday, I said. The board meets on Tuesday. Tuesday it is, Gordon said. He tapped the binder. You're thorough, Allison. You always were. I built the house, Gordon. I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are. You know, he said, signaling for the check. If we execute this, the stock will take a hit. Short-term pain. Better than a long-term death spiral, I countered. You're cutting out the rot. And what happens to you? I'll be fine, I said. I have a front row seat. We stood up. Gordon shook my hand. His grip was firm, cold. You're a dangerous woman, Allison DeWitt. I'm just a strategist, Gordon. Strategy is just the art of making sure the consequences land on the right people. He left with the binder. I stayed for another glass of wine. I watched the rain streak against the window. Somewhere uptown, Madison was probably ordering custom beanbag chairs for the boardroom, thinking she was winning. She didn't know that the paperwork for her eviction had just been filed. The weekend before the Tuesday board meeting felt like the heavy, static-charged air before a tornado touches down. I stayed offline mostly, but the ripples were impossible to miss. Madison had announced Project Neon would launch on Monday. The internal leaks were tragic. Apparently, the new branding featured a logo that looked suspiciously like a phallic symbol if you squinted, and the tagline was "Logistics for the Soul." On Monday morning, the launch happened. It was a disaster. Website crashed because they hadn't paid the server hosting fees. Madison forgot to forward the invoice to accounts payable. The new dynamic pricing model confused the automated ordering systems of our 3 biggest clients, causing a backlog of $12 million in orders that simply vanished into the digital ether. By Monday afternoon, the stock price had dipped 4%. Not a crash, but a wobble. A warning. I received a text from Marcus, the CFO. Marcus, it's a bloodbath. Richard is blaming IT. Madison is crying in the meditation room. Are you coming back? I didn't reply. At 4 p.m., the bomb dropped. Not publicly, but in the inboxes of the board of directors. Gordon moved fast. He sent a formal notice to the company secretary. Emergency board meeting requested by Greenpoint Capital. Agenda, review of governance protocols, and Q3 guidance discrepancies. Richard must have seen the email and laughed. He probably thought it was a formality, a check-in. He was so insulated by his own arrogance that he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't in control. I knew this because he called me at 6 p.m. Allison, he sounded breathless, fake cheery. Long time. Listen, we have a board check-in tomorrow. Greenpoint is being fussy. I need you to. Well, I know you're gone, but maybe you could just look over the deck. For old time's sake, I can pay you a consultant fee, double your rate. The desperation leaked through the phone like sewage. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to make the numbers make sense, to hide the 40% growth lie, to smooth over the compliance breach. I'm busy, Richard, I said, chopping vegetables for a salad I intended to enjoy thoroughly. Busy? Doing what? You're unemployed? I'm strategizing, I said. Allison, please. Madison is. She's overwhelmed. She's a visionary, but she needs operational support. Just come in tomorrow. 9 a.m. I'll be there, Richard, I said. You will? Oh, thank God. I knew you were a team player. I knew it. I didn't say I was coming to help, Richard. What? I said I'll be there. Goodbye. I hung up. The stage was set. Richard thought I was coming back to patch the holes in the hull. He didn't realize I was coming to watch the ship sink. I spent the rest of the evening picking out my outfit. I chose a white suit, not morning black, white, the color of cleanliness, the color of a fresh start, the color of a surgeon stepping into the operating room. I slept like a baby. Tuesday morning dawned gray and rainy. Perfect New York boardroom weather. I arrived at the Archer & Co. building at 8:45 a.m. Security hesitated, but my badge hadn't been deactivated yet. Another oversight by Madison. I didn't go to the strategy floor. I went to the executive floor. The boardroom had glass walls, frosted in the center but clear at the top and bottom. A fishbowl, I saw them inside. Richard was pacing, looking agitated. Madison was sitting at the head of the table, my seat, effectively, scrolling on her phone, looking bored. The other board members were seated, looking grim. Gordon Vane hadn't arrived yet. I stood in the hallway, just out of direct sight near the coffee cart. Marcus, the CFO, walked by. He saw me. He stopped. He looked at my white suit, then at the closed boardroom door. Allison, he whispered, what are you doing? Just watching the market correct itself, Marcus, I said. You might want to go inside. You don't want to miss the opening act. He looked at me, confused, then terrified. He hurried inside. Then the elevator pinged. Gordon Vane stepped out. He wasn't alone. He had two junior associates with him, both carrying boxes of files. And he had a man in a gray suit who looked painfully like a forensic accountant. Gordon saw me. He didn't wave. He just adjusted his tie and walked toward the boardroom door. The executioner had arrived. Gordon pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. The sound of conversation inside died instantly. Richard stopped pacing and put on his best fake smile. Gordon, good to see you. We were just discussing the minor hiccups with the launch. Growing pains, right? Gordon didn't smile. He didn't sit down. He walked to the end of the table, opposite Richard and Madison. His associates placed the boxes of files on the table with a heavy thud. This isn't a discussion about growing pains, Richard, Gordon said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. It carried out into the hallway where I was standing. This is a formal invocation of Article 7D of the Shareholder Rights Agreement. Madison looked up from her phone. Article what? Is that like? A bylaw? Boring. Gordon ignored her. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single document. It was thick, stapled, and flagged with red tabs. He slid it down the long mahogany table. It spun perfectly, coming to a rest right in front of Richard. Notice of leadership disqualification proceedings, Gordon stated. Richard stared at the paper. Disqualification? You can't. I have majority voting rights. I own this company. Not under conditions of material mismanagement, Gordon said. We have evidence of securities fraud regarding the Q3 guidance. We have evidence of gross negligence in vendor compliance. And we have documentation of willful destruction of internal governance controls. Fraud? Richard's face went pale. That was just a projection, a draft. It was submitted to the investor portal, Gordon said. That makes it a binding disclosure. And since the numbers were fabricated, manually entered, overriding the financial model, it constitutes intent to deceive. The room went deadly silent. The other board members, old money types who cared about nothing but their own liability, started shifting in their seats. They looked at Richard like he was radioactive. But Madison did the deck, Richard stammered, throwing his own niece under the bus without a second of hesitation. She's the CSO. She prepared the numbers. Gordon turned his gaze to Madison. She looked small suddenly. Her boss babe confidence evaporated. I just thought 40% looked better, she said, her voice trembling. It was a manifestation goal. I was manifesting abundance. You manifested a federal crime, Miss Archer, Gordon said coldly. He signaled to the forensic accountant. You're freezing all executive authority effective immediately. An external audit team is on its way up. Security will escort the current C-suite off the premises pending the investigation. You can't do this, Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Allison, where's Allison? She can explain this. She knows the model. Allison isn't here to save you, Richard, Gordon said. Allison is the one who documented the fire while you were handing out matches. Richard froze. The realization hit him. He looked around the room, wild-eyed, then he saw me. I was standing just outside the glass wall. My white suit caught the light. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. I was just watching, impassive like a judge at a sentencing hearing. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from the document to Gordon to Madison and finally back to me. The betrayal he felt was palpable. It was nothing compared to the betrayal he had served me. The board will now vote on the suspension motion, Gordon said. Seconded, said the board chairman, a man who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years but knew a sinking ship when he saw one. All in favor, every hand went up. Except Richard's and Madison's. Motion carried, Gordon said. Security? 2 uniformed guards stepped into the room. It was clinical. It was precise. It was beautiful. Madison started crying. But my office, I just bought a velvet couch. Leave the couch, the guard said. As they were escorted out, Richard stopped near the door. He looked at me through the open glass. He looked old, defeated. You built this trap, he whispered. I built a safety net for the company, Richard, I said, stepping forward so only he could hear. You just decided to jump without checking if you were caught in it. He walked away. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hall was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The silence in the boardroom after Richard and Madison left was heavy, but it was a different kind of heavy. It wasn't fear anymore, it was the vacuum left by a sudden power vacuum. The board chairman, a man named Sterling who wore bodies unironically, cleared his throat. He looked at the empty chairs at the head of the table. Then he looked at Gordon. Then, inevitably, all looked at me standing in the doorway. Miss DeWitt, Sterling said, his voice dripping with sudden, sycophantic warmth. Perhaps you should join us. I walked into the room. I didn't sit in Richard's chair. I didn't sit in Madison's. I stood at the end of the table, leaning slightly against the credenza. Mr. Sterling, I said, this is a most unfortunate turn of events, Sterling said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. We had no idea the extent of the mismanagement. You had the quarterly reports, I said calmly. You had the audit memos. You chose not to read them because the dividends were clearing. He flinched. Truth hurts, especially when it threatens your liability insurance. Yes, well, he stammered, we must look forward. We are effectively rudderless. We need an interim CEO, and obviously a competent chief strategy officer to clean up this Project Neon mess. The room murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. They were looking at me like I was a life raft in a storm. Allison, Gordon said, his voice neutral. The board is prepared to offer you the CSO position, effective immediately. With a significant equity package, I assume? He looked at Sterling. Double the equity. Sterling cried, triple whatever it takes. We need stability. We need someone who knows the codes. It was everything I had wanted 3 weeks ago. It was the title, the money, the validation. It was the victory lap. I could sit in that chair, fire the sycophants, rebuild the strategy, and rule the kingdom I had saved. I looked at the faces around the table. Old, frightened men who only valued competence when their own necks were on the line. I looked at the life logistics mood board Madison had left on the easel. I felt nothing. The hunger was gone. The ambition to lead this specific company had evaporated the moment I saw Richard dragged out. It wasn't my kingdom anymore. It was a crime scene. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Sterling, I said. The room held its breath, but I decline. Sterling's jaw dropped. Decline? But you wanted this. You engineered this. I engineered accountability, I said. I didn't engineer a job interview, but who will run the strategy? Marcus, the CFO, asked, panicking. I can't do the projections alone. I looked at Gordon. We had discussed this possibility. I recommend you promote Sarah from the analytics team, I said. She's smart, she's diligent, and she actually read the compliance manual. She can handle the interim role. Sarah, Sterling asked, the girl with the nose ring, the woman with the master's in data science, I corrected. She's your best bet. I pushed off the credenza. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lunch reservation. Allison, Sterling called out as I turned to leave. Where are you going? What are you going to do? I paused at the door. I looked back at the room, the mahogany table, the expensive chairs, the panic in the eyes of the powerful. I'm going to start my own firm, I said, and my first client is Greenpoint Capital. We're going to be looking very closely at mid-market companies with governance issues. I suggest you keep your house in order, Mr. Sterling. I walked out. Gordon caught my eye one last time. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Salute from one predator to another. I walked to the elevator. The air felt lighter. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a rhythm of pure, unadulterated freedom. I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was walking away from the need for their permission. 2 months later, the dust had settled, but the landscape was permanently changed. Richard took an early retirement due to health reasons. The press release was vague, but the industry knew. He was toxic. He moved to Florida, where I assume he spends his days cheating at golf and complaining about cancel culture. Madison tried to pivot to being a lifestyle coach on TikTok. Last I checked, she had 400 followers and was trying to sell a course on corporate manifestation. I watched one video. She was filming in her parents' basement. I didn't like it. I didn't dislike it. I just scrolled past. She was irrelevant. Archer & Co. survived barely. Sarah, the analyst I recommended, stepped up. She's doing a good job. She calls me sometimes for advice. I bill her my full hourly rate. She pays it happily. As for me, I'm sitting in my new office. It's a loft in Tribeca. Exposed brick, big windows, no mahogany tables. The sign on the door says DeWitt Strategic. I didn't steal Greenpoint's business. I became their partners. Gordon Vane and I have a standing arrangement. He finds the companies that are rotting from the inside, and I go in and perform the surgery. Sometimes we save the patient. Sometimes we just salvage the organs. Either way, we win. I received a package yesterday. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of the Archer & Co. executive team from 5 years ago. Richard, me, Marcus, we looked happy, or at least we looked profitable. Tucked into the frame was a note on Richard's personal stationery. You were always the smartest person in the room. I just forgot that meant you were smarter than me. I tossed the photo in the trash. I kept the frame. It was high quality. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. But that's a cliché. Revenge isn't a dish, it's a deliverable. It's a project with a timeline, KPI, and a critical path. And if you execute it correctly, if you dot every I and cross every T and bury every clause in the fine print, it doesn't just feel like winning, it feels like balancing the books. I took a sip of my coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from LinkedIn. Madison Archer has viewed your profile. I smiled, let her look. Alexa, I said to the empty, sunlit room, play The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. The bass kicked in. I opened my laptop. I had a new client meeting in 10 minutes. A CEO in Chicago who thought he could hire his mistress as the CFO. Poor guy. He has no idea I'm coming. Real power doesn't announce itself, it operates with quiet precision. Allison's congrats and resignation weren't surrender, but the strategic trigger that unraveled everything. She knew the game, and she played it perfectly. True authority is earned, not just handed out. Never underestimate the quiet ones who build the foundations. Appreciate you all for sticking through this one. See you in the next story. I knew the meeting was going to be a disaster when I saw the bagel spread. It was that sad, corporate assortment of dry pumpernickel and blueberry imitation bagels that look like they've been sitting out since the last fiscal quarter, paired with a tub of cream cheese that had definitely seen warmer days. But the real tell wasn't the stale carbs, it was the smell of the room. It smelled like fear and cheap cologne. Cocktail I've come to recognize over 20 years in IT. We were herded into the main conference room, the visionary suite, because apparently naming rooms after actual functions is too passé for the modern fintech disruptor. I stood in the back, leaning against the server room door frame, my natural habitat. I'm Grace. I don't do synergy, I don't do circle backs, and I certainly don't do whatever the hell was happening at the front of the room. I do security. Specifically, I manage the dark, boring, and terrifyingly important intersection where this private financial firm touches the federal government's money. Enter Caleb Roth, the new VP of Technology. Caleb is what happens when a LinkedIn profile gains sentience and buys a Patagonia vest. He's 32, has teeth white enough to blind a pilot, and speaks exclusively in TED Talk subtitles. He'd been here 3 weeks. In that time, he'd managed to use the phrase paradigm shift 47 times, I counted, and had yet to log into a single administrative console correctly. He tapped the microphone, sending a screech of feedback through the room that made half the engineering team wince. Team, family, rock stars, Caleb started, flashing a smile that didn't reach his dead, shark-like eyes. We're entering a new era, an era of agility. An era of cloud-first, lean-forward, disruptive innovation. Checked my watch. 9:04 a.m. He had 6 minutes before I had to run the daily encryption cycle on the node. To get there, Caleb continued, his voice dropping to that faux somber tone executives use when they're about to ruin lives. We need to trim the fat. We need to shed the legacy weight that's anchoring us to the past. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system and the distinct sound of a junior developer hyperventilating. Grace, he said. He didn't look at a piece of paper. He just looked right at me, pointing a finger gun. Actual finger guns in a layoff meeting. You're a legend here, really. But your role, it's redundant. We're moving everything to an automated cloud infrastructure managed by an external vendor. The on-prem hardware is dinosaur tech. Today is your last day. The air left the room. People turned to look at me. I saw pity in the eyes of the older sysadmins, ones who knew that dinosaur tech was actually a hardened localized server mandated by the Department of Defense. I didn't blink, I didn't cry. I just felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. It was the same feeling I get when I see a red line in a server log, a problem that needs isolating. Is that so? I asked, my voice flat. It is, Caleb smirked, clearly enjoying the power trip. HR has your packet. Security will escort you out. Oh, and Grace, please leave the company laptop on the table. Asset retention policy. Now, here is the part where most people would scream. They would shout about their 15 years of service, the weekends spent patching zero-day exploits, the holidays missed keeping the network from imploding. I almost did. But then I looked at the laptop in my hand. It wasn't a standard issue Dell. It was a heavy, matte black unit with reinforced ports and a biometric scanner that required a fingerprint and a retinal match to boot the OS. It was one of 3 audit nodes in existence. Caleb, I said, stepping forward, you sure about the hardware? This isn't a standard workstation. Company property, Grace, he snapped, his smile fading into annoyance. Leave it. We'll wipe it and repurpose it for the interns. Repurpose it for the interns. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. He wanted to give a machine containing classified cryptographic keys to a 20-year-old named Braden so he could make TikToks on his lunch break. I walked up to the table. The room was watching the old guard surrender to the new blood. I placed the laptop gently on the mahogany surface. Okay, I said. It's all yours, Caleb. I turned to leave. Hey, hold up a sec, he called out. I stopped. Badge 2. I unclipped my badge, one with the special holographic stripe that allowed entry into the SIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, in the basement, and tossed it next to the laptop. Speaking of tossing things, if you're enjoying witnessing a corporate train wreck in slow motion, go ahead and hit subscribe and give this a like. It helps me pay for the therapy I clearly don't need because I have revenge instead. Thanks, guys. Good luck with the cloud, I said, walking toward the exit. "We make our own luck," Caleb replied, already turning his back to me to address the terrified survivors. I walked out of the conference room, down the long hallway lined with inspirational posters that said things like grit and hustle, and into the elevator. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was in diagnostic mode. Because here's the thing Caleb didn't know, that laptop isn't just a computer. It's a literal piece of federal infrastructure on loan to the firm. It's tracked, it's monitored, and most importantly, it has a sticker on the bottom that he didn't bother to read. As the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the office I'd built from the ground up, I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against a small, innocuous-looking USB drive. It wasn't data I'd stolen. I'm not a criminal. It was my personal encryption key backup, something I'm legally required to keep on my person at all times per the terms of my clearance. Without me, and without that key, the audit node on the table wasn't just a brick. It was a time bomb, and Caleb had just decided to sit on it. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I had a feeling that the Department of Defense was going to be very interested in Caleb's asset retention policy. I sat in my car, a practical, paid-off sedan because I'm an adult, and stared at the building. I could see Caleb through the glass walls of the conference room, gesturing wildly, probably explaining how much money he just saved the company. "Idiot," I whispered. I started the car. I didn't go home immediately. I drove to a diner 3 towns over, ordered coffee and pie, and sat there for 2 hours just breathing. I needed to let the timestamp solidify. I needed the logs to show a clear gap between my termination and whatever stupid thing he was about to do next. The game had started, and he didn't even know he was playing. My home office is a sanctuary of cable management. There's no dust, there are no tangled wires. There's a tri-monitor setup that hums with the low, steady frequency of a well-oiled machine. It's the antithesis of the chaotic, open-plan nightmare I just left. I sat down in my Herman Miller chair. I won indulgence and exhaled. The adrenaline from the morning was fading, replaced by the dull ache of insult, redundant. The word kept bouncing around my skull. I built that network. I patched it when the Russians poked at it in 2016. I secured it when the crypto miners tried to hijack our servers in 2020. And now, I was redundant because a guy who wears loafers with no socks said so. I opened my personal laptop. Be clear, I did not hack back into the company. I didn't need to. I am the custodian of the Federal Bridge. My status as a contact point for the agency doesn't disappear just because Caleb took my badge. Until the paperwork clears in DC, which takes weeks, I am still the registered keeper of the keys. I logged into the external government portal. It's a drab, gray website that looks like it was designed in 1998, but it has more security layers than the Pentagon. Two-factor authentication, a hardware token, and a password that is 32 characters of gibberish. Access granted. I navigated to the asset status page. There they were, the 3 audit nodes. Node 1, offline safe in the server room. Node 2, offline safe in the backup vault. Node 3, active. My stomach dropped. Node 3 was the laptop I left on the table. It shouldn't be active. It should have gone into sleep mode the moment my biometrics were removed from the immediate vicinity for more than 10 minutes. Unless he forced a hard reboot, I muttered to the empty room. I watched the logs populate in real time. The timestamps were glowing in amber text against the black background. 11:42 a.m., hard reset initiated. 11:45 a.m., BIOS challenge failed. 11:46 a.m., BIOS challenge failed. 11:50 a.m., admin override attempted user, Croth admin. He was trying to brute force a federally encrypted machine using his corporate admin credentials. It was like trying to open a bank vault with a library card. "Caleb, you absolute moron," I whispered. I took a sip of water, my eyes glued to the screen. Every failed attempt was being logged not just on the machine, but on the mirrored server at the agency. He was flagging himself. With every incorrect password, he was waving a giant digital flag that said, "Hi, I am unauthorized and I am touching sensitive material." Then the log changed color. Red, 12:05 p.m., perimeter breach alert intrusion detected on port 8080. He wasn't just trying to log in. He had plugged it into the open internet. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. The audit nodes are air-gapped devices. They are never, ever supposed to touch the public web. They connect only via a secure, encrypted tunnel. By plugging an Ethernet cable into it, or worse, connecting it to the office Wi-Fi, Caleb had just exposed a classified endpoint to the wild internet. This wasn't a firing offense anymore. This was a federal agents in windbreakers showing up at your house offense. I had a choice. I could call him. I could call the office, get him on the line, and scream at him to unplug it before the automated sweepers found it. I could save his career. I could save the company the massive fine they were about to incur. I reached for my phone. I dialed the main office line. "Thank you for calling," I hung up. "Redundant," I said aloud. "I'm redundant." If I was redundant, then my warnings were redundant too. Instead, I opened a new email window. I typed in the address of my handler at the agency. Let's call him Agent Miller. Miller is a man who has no sense of humor and even less patience for incompetence. Subject: Notice of status change slash potential asset compromise Agent Miller, effective 09:00 a.m. today. My employment with company name was terminated. I was ordered to surrender custody of audit node 3, serial hash 8892 alpha, to Mr. Caleb Roth, VP of Technology. Despite my verbal warning regarding chain of custody protocols, I am observing erratic activity on the asset beacon. I am no longer on premises and cannot intervene. Please advise. Regards, Grace. I hit send. The beauty of the system is the bureaucracy. I had done my duty. I had reported the separation. I had reported the asset location. Whatever happened next was entirely 100% on Caleb. I refreshed the log page. 12:15 p.m., directory structure accessed via guest protocol. He had managed to bypass the login screen using a guest account exploit, an old trick that works on consumer Windows but triggers a honeypot mode on these secure machines. The machine lets you think you're in. It shows you folders. It lets you click things. But it's recording every keystroke, every mouse movement, and it's sandboxing you in a digital cage while it traces your location. Caleb thought he had cracked it. I could practically see him high-fiving the other bros in the conference room. Look at this, he'd say. Grace locked it down, but I got in. I'm a genius. He was browsing the honeypot files. He was opening folders labeled Confidential Budget and Black Project Alpha. These folders were empty decoys, digital flypaper. But then I saw the metadata tag for a file he uploaded to the machine. File name, Do Pitch Deck Final V2. PPTX size, 45 MB. He wasn't just looking. He was using the classified laptop to store his own presentation. He was treating a government audit node like a USB stick. I leaned back in my chair. The silence of the house felt heavy, charged with static. You didn't just touch the stove, Caleb, I said, watching the cursor blink. You just climbed inside the oven. To understand why Caleb is currently dancing on a landmine, you have to understand how I got hired. 7 years ago, this company, let's call them FinCorp, landed a massive contract to process transaction data for a sub-agency of the DoD. It was the kind of money that buys executives second homes in Aspen, but with that money came the clause. The clause stated that FinCorp had to maintain a localized, hardened infrastructure for data validation. No cloud, no Oz, no Google Drive, just cold, hard steel in a locked room, managed by a custodian with a specific level of security clearance. That's me. I wasn't hired because of my sparkling personality or my ability to pivot tables in Excel. I was hired because I hold a TS/PSI clearance with a polygraph chaser. I am the human requirement for their billion-dollar revenue stream. For the first 5 years, the old CTO, a guy named Marcus, understood this. Marcus was great. He wore cargo shorts and looked like he slept in a server rack, but he respected the hardware. He knew that when I said no, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a law of physics. Grace is the wall, Marcus used to say. We don't drill holes in the wall. Then Marcus retired to raise alpacas in Vermont, and the board decided they wanted fresh energy. They wanted a disruptor. Enter Caleb. I remember his first week. He walked into my office, which was actually a converted storage closet next to the server room because I needed to be close to the metal, and wrinkled his nose. Little dark in here, isn't it? He asked, leaning against the doorframe, sipping a green juice that cost more than my hourly rate. Keeps the heat down, I said, not looking up from my monitors. Right. Listen, Grace, I'm looking at the org chart, and I'm seeing a lot of hardware dependency in your sector. We need to virtualize this. Move it to the lake. The lake? I asked, finally turning my chair. The data lake, the cloud. We need to be agile. You can't virtualize the audit nodes, I said simply. They're air-gapped by federal mandate. Clause 4, Section B of the contract. He rolled his eyes. Everything can be virtualized, Grace. You just need to have the vision for it, you legacy IT types. You're so attached to your boxes. It's cute, really, like collecting vinyl records. Cute. That was the moment. That was the exact second I decided that if this man ever fell off a cliff, I wouldn't be the one throwing him a rope. He saw me as a relic, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan who plugged things in and turned them off and on again. He didn't see the complexity of the encryption I managed. He didn't see the daily attacks I deflected. He didn't see that I was the only reason his email didn't get read by teenagers in basements in generic non-extradition countries. He saw a janitor. Over the next few months, he chipped away at my department. He fired my junior admin, a bright kid named Leo, because Leo refused to install unauthorized monitoring software on the employee network. He cut our budget for spare parts. He started calling the server room the museum. I took it. I kept my head down. I documented every denied request, every policy violation, every sarcastic email. I knew guys like Caleb. They float upward on a bubble of hot air until they hit an altitude where the oxygen runs out. But I never thought he'd be stupid enough to fire the compliance officer. Back in the present, I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen at home. The honeypot on the laptop was active. Caleb was currently exploring a folder I had created a year ago called Project Ghost. It contained absolutely nothing of value, just gigabytes of random noise data that looked like encrypted code. But to a guy like Caleb, it looked like the Holy Grail. I remembered a conversation from 2 weeks ago. Caleb had been bragging about a pitch he was making to a defense contractor, Lockheed, names changed for legal reasons, obviously. He needed a wow factor. He needed to show them that FinCorp wasn't just a bank, it was a tech powerhouse. I need something sexy, he had said, pacing around my office while I tried to work. I need to show them we have military-grade analytics. We don't, I had said. We process payments. We aren't spies. Not with that attitude, he'd sneered. And now, looking at the logs, seeing that due pitch deck file sitting on the secure drive, I realized what he was doing. He was going to use the audit node, a mysterious black government-stamped laptop, as a prop. He was going to walk into a meeting with a defense contractor, open up a classified government machine, and say, "Look what I built." He wasn't just incompetent, he was suicidal. I felt a strange pang of sadness. Not for him, God no, but for the sheer waste of it. He had a degree from Wharton. He had a jagged jawline. He had a future. He was about to trade it all for a cool PowerPoint presentation. I minimized the log window and opened a fresh document. I titled it Chronology of Compromise. I started typing. Date, October 14th. Event, unauthorized seizure of federal asset. Actor, Caleb Roth. I wasn't writing a diary. I was writing an affidavit because when the dust settled, there would be an inquiry. And I intended to be the one holding the pen, not the one in the handcuffs. There is a saying in my line of work: you can delete the file, but you can't delete the shadow. Metadata is the shadow. It's the story about the data. It tells you who created it, when they touched it, what machine they were on, and how long they stared at it. Caleb thinks that because he has the physical laptop, he has control. He doesn't understand that the laptop is just a terminal. The brain is watching him. I spent the afternoon compiling the dossier. It was tedious work, but satisfying, like popping bubble wrap. Evidence item A, the log of him connecting the laptop to the boardroom Wi-Fi. Evidence item B, the timestamp of him disabling the antivirus, which, unbeknownst to him, only disabled the notification icon, not the actual protection. Evidence item C, the screenshot of him attempting to copy the honeypot files to a thumb drive. That last one was particularly damning. System flagged the USB drive as generic mass storage vendor ID, unrecognized. He was trying to take data off a secure machine onto an insecure stick. That's a Tier 1 violation. That's lose your clearance forever territory. But the cherry on top was the webcam logs. The audit nodes are equipped with security cameras that snap a photo every time there's a failed login or a security flag. Caleb had generated about 40 flags in 3 hours. I opened the image cache. There he was, grainy, black and white, lit by the glow of the screen. In one photo, he was frowning. In another, he was laughing, pointing at the screen while a blurry figure, probably a sycophantic junior manager, looked on. In the third, he was eating a burrito over the keyboard. Crumbs in the keyboard, I noted, typing it into the report. Violation of hygiene protocols for secure hardware. Petty? Maybe. Accurate? Yes. At 3:00 p.m. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Area code 703, Northern Virginia. I picked it up on the first ring. Grace, a voice said. It was dry, raspy, and sounded like it belonged to a man who smokes cigars while reading redacted documents. Agent Miller. Agent Miller, I replied. Did you get my email? We did. We're seeing some unusual telemetry from Node 3. Is the device in your possession? Negative. As stated in my email, I was terminated this morning. The device was confiscated by Caleb Roth, VP of Technology, against my express advisement. There was a pause on the line, a long, heavy pause. He confiscated a node? Miller asked, his voice dropping an octave. Does he have the encryption key? No, he's running a guest session. But he's plugged it into the commercial web, and he's loading proprietary files onto it. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking on Miller's end. Fast, rhythmic. We're seeing a data packet match, Miller said. He's uploading a presentation. The file header contains keywords, defense contract integration. He's pitching to Lockheed tomorrow, I said. He wants to use the laptop as a prop. He's going to demo a live classified node to a third-party vendor. Miller sounded almost impressed by the stupidity. That appears to be the plan. Grace, Miller said, this is a significant breach. Protocol dictates we brick the device remotely immediately. Wait, I said, this was the pivot point. If they bricked it, destroyed it electronically, now Caleb would just say the laptop was broken. He'd blame me for giving him faulty hardware. He'd spin it. He'd survive. If you brick it now, I said, you lose the evidence of intent. He'll claim ignorance. He'll say it was an accident, but if you let him walk into that meeting, if you let him present it, and you have him on espionage and fraud, you have him dead to rights. Silence on the line, I held my breath. I was asking a federal agent to let a security breach continue for the sake of entrapment. It was risky. When is the meeting? Miller asked. Tomorrow, 2:00 p.m., boardroom B, and you have access to his schedule? I built the calendar server, I said. I have access to everything. All right, Miller said, we'll hold fire. But Grace, you're reactivated. Consultant status. Temporary clearance override approved as of. Right now, you are to monitor the asset and ensure no data actually leaves the device. If he tries to email anything out, you kill the connection. Understood, I said, and Grace? Yes, we're going to need a witness on site, someone to verify chain of custody when we move in. I'm fired, Miller. They won't let me in the building. They won't have a choice, Miller said. I'm sending a team. Ready at 1 p.m. tomorrow. The line went dead. I looked at my screen. The employment status field on my HR profile, which I could still see because they hadn't revoked my read-only access to the legacy portal, said terminated. I opened the admin console for my own account. I couldn't change the HR status, but I could update my contact info. I changed my job title from Systems Administrator to External Compliance Auditor. I smiled, the trap was set. Now I just had to watch him walk into it. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the FinCorp office was effectively burning down. Not literally, though the server room AC unit was probably struggling, but digitally. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking high-quality coffee, not the office swill, watching the help desk ticketing system. I still had the dashboard mirrored on my tablet. It was a waterfall of red. Ticket hash 4092, CFO cannot access payroll folder. Ticket hash 4093, VPN tunnel to Chicago branch down. Ticket hash 4095, urgent CEO email bouncing. You see, what Caleb didn't understand about legacy junk is that it requires care. The authentication servers run a handshake protocol every morning at 8 a.m. It requires a manual approval from the lead admin. That's me. I wasn't there to click approve. So the servers assumed the building had been seized by hostiles and went into lockdown mode. I could picture the scene. The sales guys slamming their mice, the traders screaming about lost milliseconds, and Caleb, sweating in his Patagonia vest, trying to explain why the cloud transition was causing the elevators to stop working. Yes, the security badge system was routed through the same auth server, my little design quirk. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah from accounting. Sarah is a good kid. She brings in donuts on Fridays and knows more about the company gossip than the HR director. Grace, oh my God, she whispered. She was clearly hiding in the bathroom. I could hear the echo. Hey Sarah, rough morning? Rough, it's the apocalypse. No one can log in. The printers are printing pages of pure black ink. The coffee machine is displaying an error code I've never seen. Caleb is running around screaming that you sabotaged the system before you left. Predictable, I said, buttering a piece of toast. I didn't sabotage anything. I just wasn't there to turn the key. He's telling everyone it's a logic bomb you planted. He's threatening to sue you. Let him threaten, I said. What's he doing now? He's in the boardroom with his assistants. They're trying to get the presentation ready for the lockhead guys. But Sarah lowered her voice further. He's using that black laptop, the weird one. He says it's the only computer that's stable right now. I laughed. It was perfect. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. The only reason the audit node was working was because it wasn't connected to the company network I'd supposedly sabotaged. It was running on its own independent, government-grade architecture. He was fleeing the burning building and hiding inside the bomb. Sarah, I said, do me a favor. Stay away from Boardroom B this afternoon. Why, just trust me, take a long lunch. Go to that salad place you like, okay? Grace, are you coming back? Everyone is saying we need you. I don't think I'll be coming back, Sarah. Not in the way you think. I hung up. On my screen, a new alert popped up from the audit node. 10:30 a.m., external projector connected via HDMI. He was doing a dry run. I clicked on the remote desktop view, a feature strictly for auditing, of course. A window opened showing exactly what was on the laptop screen. It was a PowerPoint slide. The title was Future Warfare, FinCorp's Defense Analytics, and underneath, in bold letters, proprietary technology developed by Caleb Roth. He had pasted his name over the watermark that clearly said property of U.S. Gov. He had literally put a text box over it with a white background to hide it. I took a screenshot. Click, that's fraud, I said. Then he opened a spreadsheet. It was the confidential budget decoy file I'd seen him looking at earlier. He had renamed it Live Transaction Feed. He was going to pretend the random numbers in that file were real-time military transactions. And that's falsifying data, I added. Then, I saw him open his email via the web browser. He was composing a message to the CEO. Subject, the Grace problem James, as suspected, the legacy employee left behind a series of digital traps. This confirms my decision to terminate. I have the situation under control using the new secure hardware I provisioned. The lock head pitch will proceed as planned. We are better off without her. New secure hardware I provisioned, I read aloud. I took another screenshot. Click. You claim procurement of government property, I said. That's? Well, I don't even know the name of that crime, but it sounds like 5 to 10 years. The chaos in the office was just the overture. The symphony was about to start. I went to my closet and pulled out my suit, the charcoal one I wore for federal audits. I brushed off a piece of lint. It was 12:30 p.m. Time to go to work, I said. I pulled into the parking lot of FinCorp at 1:15 p.m. I parked in the visitor section, which felt strange after 10 years of having a reserved spot, but I appreciated the view. From here, I could see the main entrance. Two black SUVs were already idling at the curb. Chevy Tahoes, tinted windows, government plates, they weren't hiding. This wasn't a covert op. This was a compliance visit. I walked up to the lead vehicle. The window rolled down. Agent Miller looked exactly like he sounded, gray buzz cut, sunglasses, and a suit that cost more than my car but looked like he'd slept in it. Grace, he nodded, get in. I climbed into the back seat. It smelled like leather and serious intent. There was another agent next to me, a younger woman with a tablet. Status? Miller asked. He's in the boardroom, I said. He set up the laptop. He's expecting the Lockheed reps in 45 minutes. He thinks he's about to close a $50 million deal. And the data? He's loaded a slide deck that claims ownership of the encryption algorithms on the node. He's presenting the hardware as a proprietary prototype. Miller shook his head. I almost don't believe it. I've seen dumb, but this is advanced dumb. It gets better, I said, pulling out my phone. I have a recording from 10 minutes ago. I hadn't mentioned this earlier. I had tapped into the laptop's microphone. It's a feature designed for audit notes, allowing the user to dictate memos. But if you leave the channel open, it just listens. I pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the SUV cabin, tinny but clear. Look, I don't care about the warnings, Caleb was saying, presumably to his assistant. Just put the sticker over the barcode. Yeah, the Intel Inside sticker. Just cover the government tag. They won't look at the bottom. These defense guys are dinosaurs. They just want to see blinking lights. Miller's jaw tightened. The agent next to me tapped furiously on her tablet. Tampering with federal property markers, the female agent muttered. Intent to deceive. He called Lockheed dinosaurs, Miller noted dryly. That's going to go over well. So what's the play? I asked. Do we wait for the Lockheed team to arrive? No, Miller said. We intercept before the third party is involved. Don't want Lockheed seeing our hardware, even if it is in the hands of an idiot. We go in now. We secure the asset. We secure the individual. He's going to make a scene, I warned. He's the VP. He thinks he owns the place. Miller turned to look at me, removing his sunglasses. His eyes were the color of cold steel. Grace, in about 5 minutes, he's going to realize he doesn't even own the shirt on his back. We stepped out of the car. Visual was striking, me in my sharp charcoal suit flanked by 4 federal agents. We walked toward the glass doors of the lobby. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Kelly, looked up. Her eyes went wide. She saw me. She saw the agents. She saw the badges hanging from their necks, badges that didn't say visitor but Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Defense. Grace, she squeaked, I thought you were. I'm just here to pick up my laptop, Kelly, I said, smiling gently. Is Caleb in boardroom B? Why, yes, but he said no interruptions. Miller leaned over the desk. He didn't smile. Ma'am, he said, we are the interruption. He flashed his credentials. Kelly nodded, pale as a sheet, and buzzed the door open. We walked through the bullpen. The office was still in chaos from the network outage. People were huddled in groups, complaining, looking at blank screens. As we passed, the noise died down. Heads turned. Wave of silence followed us like a wake behind a boat. They saw Grace, the fired IT lady, walking back in with the cavalry. I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock and glee. I gave her a nearly imperceptible wink. We reached the double doors of boardroom B. I could hear Caleb's voice inside. He was practicing his speech. And that's why FinCorp is the only partner for the future of warfare. Miller looked at me. After you, I reached out and pushed the doors open. The doors swung open with a heavy thud. Caleb was standing at the head of the table. He had dimmed the lights to make his PowerPoint pop. The room was bathed in the blue glow of the projector. He looked every bit the modern tech executive, sleeves rolled up, hair perfectly gelled, laser pointer in hand. He froze mid-gesture. What the? He squinted against the light coming from the hallway. Grace, what the hell are you doing here? I told security to, then he saw the shapes behind me, 4 silhouettes. Miller stepped into the room and flipped the light switch. The overhead fluorescence flickered on, washing out Caleb's dramatic blue mood lighting and exposing the sweat on his forehead. Who are these people? Caleb demanded, his voice cracking slightly. This is a closed meeting. I have clients arriving in 20 minutes. Get out. He tried to muster his alpha male command voice, and he probably practiced in the mirror. It didn't work, not against these guys. Caleb Roth? Miller asked, stepping forward. He didn't shout. He spoke with the quiet volume of a man who owns the room. Yes, I'm the VP of Technology, and you are trespassing. Special Agent Miller, Duty Inspector General's office. This is Agent Zhang, FBI Cyber Division. Caleb blinked. The laser pointer in his hand shook, dancing a jagged red line across the screen behind him. Duty? Caleb laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Is this a joke? Did Grace hire strippers? Is this a prank? He looked at me with a sneer. That's pathetic, Grace, even for you, trying to scare me with fake cops. I didn't say anything. I just walked over to the side of the table and set my purse down. I crossed my arms. It's not a prank, Caleb, I said softly. Miller walked around the table. He moved slowly, deliberately. He stopped right in front of Caleb. I have reason to believe you are in possession of classified government hardware, Miller said. Specifically an audit node, serial 8892 Alpha. Caleb scoffed. Hardware? You mean the laptop? That's company property. I fired her. He pointed the laser at me and I retained the asset. It's standard procedure. Is it? Miller asked. He looked at the laptop sitting open on the table. It was plugged into the projector. The slide deck was still up, proprietary technology. Miller looked at the screen, then back at Caleb. Mr. Roth, are you claiming ownership of the technology on that screen? Absolutely, Caleb said, puffing his chest out. I developed the integration strategy myself. It's a breakthrough. Miller nodded to Agent Zhang. Zhang tapped her tablet on the record. Suspect claims ownership of classified encryption protocols. Suspect? Caleb's face went red. Now listen here, I know the CEO. I can have your badges, fake or not, revoked. Can't just walk in here and the laptop, Caleb, I interrupted. He looked at me. What? The laptop you're using? The one you said was dinosaur tech yesterday. The one you're using to pitch to Lockhead, it's just a computer, he shouted. It's a tool and it's mine now. Actually, I said, it's not. I looked at Miller. Miller nodded. Mr. Roth, Miller said, please step away from the device. No, Caleb said, putting his hand on the lid as if to protect it. This is my presentation. My work is on here. Step away. Miller's hand moved slightly toward his belt. He didn't draw a weapon, but the shift in posture was enough. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Caleb took his hand off the laptop and took a step back. Fine, fine, look at it, it's just Windows. Miller put on a pair of nitrile gloves. He reached out and unplugged the HDMI cable. The screen behind Caleb went black. The room felt suddenly smaller. Grace, Miller said. Confirm serial number. I walked over. I looked at the barcode on the side. Serial 8892 Alpha confirmed. Check the underside, Miller said. Caleb rolled his eyes. Oh my God, there's nothing on the underside except an Intel sticker. I checked. I looked at Caleb. You checked or you placed? I reached out and grabbed the laptop. It was warm. I could feel the fan spinning, trying to cool the processor that was crunching the massive amount of data Caleb had illegally loaded. Caleb, I said, you really should have read the manual. I flipped the laptop over. There, right in the center of the chassis, was a shiny blue Intel Inside sticker. It looked brand new. It was slightly crooked. See? Caleb smirked. Standard consumer hardware. I looked at him. You bought this sticker from a sheet, didn't you? Amazon, $5 for a pack of 10? I don't know what you're talking about, he lied. But his eyes darted to the door. Miller stepped in. Agent Zhang, if you would. Zhang stepped forward with a small pair of tweezers. With surgical precision, she caught the edge of the Intel sticker. Caleb flinched. She peeled it back slowly. The adhesive gave way with a soft zipping sound. Underneath the cheap blue sticker was a metal plate riveted into the casing. It was red and silver. The text was etched into the metal. Miller leaned in and read it aloud, his voice echoing in the silent room. Property of U.S. Government Department of Defense. He paused. Classified System Level 5 clearance required. He looked at Caleb. Unauthorized access, tampering, or removal is a federal felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison and fines not exceeding $500,000. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Caleb stared at the plate. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish that had just been pulled onto a boat. That wasn't there before, he stammered. Grace put that there. She's framing me. Miller stood up straight. Mr. Roth, this plate is riveted, and the serial number matches our inventory logs from 3 years ago. Furthermore, we have digital logs of you accessing this device, bypassing security protocols, and uploading unclassified data to a classified drive. We also have audio of you instructing your staff to cover this plate. Caleb slumped against the whiteboard. The marker tray rattled, but I was trying to streamline. You breached the Espionage Act, Miller said casually. You also violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and by connecting this device to the open internet, you compromised a federal node. Miller turned to Zhang. Secure the device, bag it. Zhang placed the laptop into a Faraday bag, a silver signal-blocking pouch. She sealed it with yellow tape. Caleb Roth, Miller said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest. No. Caleb whispered, I have a meeting. Lockhead is coming. Lockhead isn't coming, I said. I canceled the meeting from your calendar 10 minutes ago. I told them you had a legal emergency. Caleb looked at me. His eyes were wet. The arrogance was gone. The visionary VP was gone. All that was left was a scared kid in a vest. Grace, he pleaded. Grace, tell them. Tell them I didn't know. I'm not a spy. I'm just trying to do my job. I looked at him. I thought about the redundant comment. I thought about the dinosaur tech. I thought about him firing Leo. Ignorance isn't a defense, Caleb, I said, especially when you put a sticker over the warning label. Miller spun him around. Click, click. You have the right to remain silent, Miller began. I watched them march him out. He was crying now. Actual, ugly sobbing. As they passed me, Miller stopped. Grace, he said, good work. We'll need a debrief statement tomorrow. I'll be there, I said, and, strictly off the record, Miller nodded at the Faraday bag. Nice catch on the Wi-Fi breach. You kept the damage contained. Just doing my job, I said, even if I don't work here anymore. Miller smirked. We'll see about that. They walked Caleb out. I stood alone in the boardroom. The projector was still humming, displaying a blue no-signal screen. I walked over to the table, picked up my badge, which was still sitting where I'd left it yesterday, and put it in my pocket. The aftermath was swift and brutal. When the FBI walks a VP out in cuffs, people tend to notice. By 3:00 p.m., the CEO was in the lobby, pale and shaking, trying to explain to Agent Miller why his company was harboring a national security risk. Miller wasn't interested in explanations. He issued an immediate stop work order on all government contracts held by FinCorp. That's the death knell. That's 60% of their revenue gone in a single signature. I watched from the parking lot. I didn't stick around for the panicked all-hands meeting. I didn't need to hear the CEO talk about unforeseen challenges. 2 days later, I got a call. It wasn't Miller. It was the CEO, James. Grace, he said, his voice dripping with desperate charm. We owe you an apology, a massive one. Caleb was? He was a mistake, a rogue actor. He was your VP, James, I said, sipping tea on my porch. We want you back. Title bump. Salary bump. CIO, we need someone to clean this up. The dude says they won't lift the suspension unless a trusted custodian is in charge. I looked out at my garden. It was peaceful. No thanks, James. Grace, please, name your price. Double? Triple? It's not about the money, I said. It's about the culture. You let a guy like Caleb tear down the walls because he used buzzwords you liked. You didn't value the foundation until it cracked. We can change, he pleaded. Maybe, I said, but you'll have to do it with an external auditor. I'm consulting now. My rate is $400 an hour, 4-hour minimum. And I don't do synergy meetings. I hung up. Caleb is currently out on bail, awaiting trial. His lawyer is trying to plead incompetence, which, honestly, is the most accurate defense I've ever heard. But the fraud charges regarding the pitch deck, those are sticking. He's looking at federal prison time and permanently banned from working in any industry that touches government data. His career is over. As for FinCorp, they hired my consulting firm. I go in once a week. I wear jeans, I fix the servers, I charge them an obscene amount of money. Yesterday, I walked into the server room. It was quiet. The hum of the fans was steady. I logged into the admin console. I saw Caleb's old account. It was still there. Disabled, frozen in time. I typed one command, delete user /recursive. The system prompted, are you sure? This will delete all associated files and history. I didn't hesitate, enter. User deleted. It was like he never existed. No more disruption. No more paradigm shifts. Just clean, efficient, boring code. I closed the laptop, my own secure, properly labeled laptop, and walked out into the cool autumn air. Moral of the story. If you're going to fire the person who holds the keys to the kingdom, make sure you don't steal the lock on their way out. And for the love of God, always read the sticker on the bottom. We're all healed. If you liked this breakdown of corporate stupidity, maybe hit that upvote. But seriously, check your employment contracts. You never know when you might need to burn the place down. Legally, of course. Real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works quietly in the background, unnoticed. Grace's quiet understanding of the system and her cool head brought swift accountability. It's a stark reminder that true authority comes from knowledge, not just position, and disrespecting expertise has steep consequences. Appreciate you all for sticking through this one. See you in the next story.